You are listening to the Primitive Intelligence Podcast, episode 605, Dogmen, Skinwalkers, and the Demon Donkey of Bangladesh. Now, I said after last week's episode I was going to do something a little lighter, and what could be lighter than Dogmen, Skinwalkers, and Demon Donkeys? I'm going to wind up pulling stories from, well, technically 3, 4, 5 different books. It's 2 series. One is Dogmen, Bigfoot, and Something More, volumes 1 and 2. This is a brief collection of encounters by P.D. King. Really excellent stories in these books. I'll put the links to these down in the show notes so you can check them out for yourselves. I got these on my Kindle, and I maybe not the smartest idea. I read these while I was camping by myself. The other book I read was another series. This is volumes 1, 2, and 3 of Dogman, The Frightening Encounters, volumes 1, 2, and 3 by Tom Lyons. A lot of really cool stories in there as well. So definitely check those out. I'm not going to obviously go word for word for the book, but I'm going to cover a couple things from them. So this cryptid version of the Primitive Intelligence Podcast starts now.
Let's go.
I'm gonna take a wild guess that this is going to air slightly after noon on Wednesday. I wound up going camping on Monday, and I lost today. I thought today was Tuesday, and then all of a sudden I realized, I got to get the podcast done and get it up. So, recording the day of, again, I got to stop doing that. But we're gonna go through this, and this is gonna be just a fun episode. Now, we've all heard of Bigfoot. We know the stories of Bigfoot, large humanoid ape-like creature that may or may not be an actual flesh and blood creature. It may be ethereal, could be the pet of aliens. We're not really sure. Bigfoot has been covered a lot, and it's probably, if you talk cryptids to people, this is usually what they're going to tell you. They're going to say, Bigfoot, or like Loch Ness Monster or something like that. Now, I had heard of Dogmen, but I didn't realize there was as many stories as there really are. So let's do a little history on the Dogman, and then we'll go from there. This is actually kind of interesting. It covers a couple of different things that we're going to discuss. So the story of the Dogman first gained popularity in 1987 when a Michigan radio DJ made up a song for April Fool's Day based on folklore of the area about such a creature. So not a great start. Not a great start for a Dogman. Fairly quickly, though, the radio station was inundated with phone calls from listeners who had stories of their own encounters with the Dogman. However, this is not the beginning of the story. This is where as I was doing research online, a lot of sites like Wikipedia point to this as, this is where it all started. But it's really not. Back 100 years earlier, in 1887, in Wexford, Michigan, 2 lumberjacks allegedly reported seeing a 7-foot-tall creature with the head of a wolf and the torso of a man while on the job. Now, there's no written accounts of this. This is obviously anecdotal, but as far back as 1887 in Michigan, this is where these stories came from. And then over the years, there were several stories and reportings of a large 7 to 10 foot tall creature with the head of a dog or a coyote or a wolf and the body of a man, walks on 2 feet, can also easily get around on 4 legs, but its front paws, well, not even paws, they're kind of like elongated hands, and they have opposable thumbs. So a lot of these stories make mention of very similar things. There are also some intriguing connections between this legend and certain indigenous beliefs as well. Many tribes have stories of shapeshifters, often referred to as skinwalkers, who can transform into animals. These figures are typically portrayed as malevolent, dangerous, and some have compared these to the Dogman. Several tribes also revere wolves and view them as powerful spiritual beings. The Dogman's lupine features and forest-dwelling habits have led some to associate it with these wolf spirits. And some of the stories that I've read and some things I've heard, sometimes it seems like a very physical encounter, and sometimes it seems like more of a spiritual or a guardian spirit kind of encounter. Also, the Dogman resembles a depiction of the ancient Egyptian god Anubis, which is often portrayed with the body of a man and the head of a jackal or a canine. And of course, there are similarities with werewolves. Those stories can be traced back as far as ancient Greece. The story of Lycaon, who was turned into a wolf as punishment for his crimes. It's one of the earliest stories of a man turning into a wolf. Now, throughout, very fitting. I don't know if you can hear the dog barking in the background. It's very fitting for this episode. Now, there's been several iterations of werewolves throughout Europe and also America over the years, and a lot of them share similar depictions as well. So after looking at this, it got me into looking for the Dogman, and I found these two books, and I found, well, the book by Tom Lyons, Dogman, Frightening Encounters, volumes 1, 2, and 3, pretty much all Dogman stories. But the first books I read, this Dogman, Bigfoot, and Something More, a brief collection of encounters, it covers all kinds of crazy, crazy stories. So the first one I'm going to go into is Tom Lyons' book. It's a little bit more of a fun story about Dogman because it's of how it kind of happens. It's a little disturbing, but what the person who reports it claims actually may have started this encounter is actually kind of funny. So this happened in Hancock County, Mississippi. No years given, just that he was age 9 when the story happened. And he was out at a local park playing with a vortex howler. And he goes on to explain that the vortex howler is a small football with a tail, and it's got these whistles on it. So when you throw it, it makes this whistling sound. And I remember having one of those when I was a kid. So he and his dad were doing this thing where they would see how far they could throw the football. And basically, his dad could throw it further, so he was just basically playing fetch with his dad. His dad would throw the football, he'd go and get it. And after a while, his dad throws it to the edge of the field. It winds up landing next to the woods, and he goes out to go get the football. And right before he goes to pick it up, he hears something moving in the woods, and he looks up, and he sees what he thought to be someone, a very tall person, just wearing a costume. It was standing on 2 legs, just like a human, but when he saw the shape of the legs, he realized this is not a typical person. There's no way this could be a typical person. Then he looks up. He's terrified. He starts looking up, and he sees the thing's face and its head, and it had pointy ears and a wet snout and a bunch of very sharp teeth. So he turns and runs and goes back to his father, who's kind of laughing at him because he thinks he saw like a snake or something like that. And his father goes to get the football. The kid's terrified. He's trying to get his dad not to go. But his father walks up, goes and gets the football, and looks in the woods just to see what was out there. And he doesn't see anything. So the kid figures this Dogman must have moved on. And then later on, he starts to think about this and realizes that it must have been the sound of the football. Did the sound of the football attract the Dogman to the park? Like, did the dog just want to play catch? Was that what it was? Or was it darker than that? And there's a lot of stories I read where it's these kind of shorter stories, and there's not a lot of information. And they're kind of the ones I believe more, because some of these stories are pages and pages and pages and pages of every minute detail. And that almost seems too convenient. Now, some people do, remember more details than others, but it's these kind of quick, like, look, I was playing, I looked up, I saw this thing, and then I ran away. That's kind of more how, as a kid, you'd remember that. So the next story comes from Carmen, Oklahoma, from 2017. This is a very rural town. And they started getting these reports of domesticated dogs disappearing right off of people's properties, right out of their yards. And people started to think that it was just someone going around and stealing dogs, either because they want the dog or maybe they thought the dogs were being mistreated. But they never found the dogs, never found bodies, never found the dogs, never came back. And then there was this one older guy who claimed that one night he was looking out his window and he saw what he describes as a devil jump into his neighbor's yard over the fence, snatch their dog, and run off with it. Now, of course, the neighborhood thinks he's crazy, and people just think there's a dog thief. So The guy telling the story, his name is, Andrew, right? So Andrew says that he has his friend Kristen, and she's very interested in this topic, and she invites him over to her house, and him, her, and her brother start setting up these, doing like experiments to try to find this creature. So they set up, they take like strips of sirloin, I think, and the first time they just kind of lay it on the ground, and they sit in a window and they watch and nothing happens. And next time the brother hangs the meat from a branch, thinking, well, this will tell us if it's a dog or something else, because it's too high for a dog to get. With the meat hanging up in the trees, they see what they initially think is a coyote, a very large coyote. But again, this thing is on all fours, and in order to reach the meat that they got hanging from the tree, it stands up on its hind legs and then reaches up with a hand and pulls the meat down. Now, contrary to other reports, this guy says, look, this thing wasn't overly muscular. It wasn't particularly large. It was maybe the size of a tall person, but it wasn't really big. It wasn't really strong. And he thinks that maybe it was just an adolescent, or maybe it was sick. And then it sat there, it ate the meat for a little bit, and then it ran off. And that's really all they got. So they set up this meat and they had this thing come in. But the weird thing is, again, this creature stands up on its hind legs, but it doesn't have paws. It's not trying to get it like a dog would still try to use its mouth to grab the meat. This reached up with its hands and picked it out of the tree. So those are two of the stories I pulled out of the Dogman Frightening Encounters, volumes 1, 2, and 3. There are a lot more stories in here, obviously. Some of them are quite long, and a lot of them read very much the same, where there's, for some reason in this book, it seems like a lot of the people have been drinking, which is weird, and I don't know if that plays a part in it, but they see a creature that's maybe it starts out on 4 legs, and then it stands up on 2, or they see it on 2 legs, and it gets on all 4s and chases them. But a lot of the very similar descriptions: large, 7, 8 foot tall, muscular creature with a dog-like head, sometimes described as either like a coyote or a German shepherd, but with more human-like eyes, and then dog-like legs, a human torso, and then really oddly shaped hands. Really bizarre stories. And there's a lot of them. Next, though, I want to move on to the book by P.D. King, Dogmen, Bigfoot, and Something More, volumes 1 and 2, a brief collection of encounters. Really interesting stories, and not all these are dogmen. The first story I'm going to cover happens in Arizona. It just says a long time ago. This person was driving home from a friend's house. It was about 4 a.m., and they started to not feel well, so pulled over just to roll down the windows and get a little bit of air. And as they're sitting there, they start to hear footsteps coming down the road. Now, the car is off, lights are off. They hear someone walking down the road, and they can't really see. The footsteps start getting closer, and they can tell that this person is walking a little bit faster towards their car. So, a little bit freaked out, they start the car, turn on the headlights, and they see what's walking towards them. And it was this really, really thin, very tall, lanky-looking guy walking directly towards them. But his face had huge black eyes, no nose, and razor-thin lips, very pale, and kind of had this weird shuffling walk. That's just creepy. You don't feel good. You're sitting in your car, you're in the dark, and you just see this tall, lanky, big-eyed, no-nose, thin-lipped, pale dude shuffling towards you on the road. His arms were also really long. It looked like his hands were going past his knees, and kept his arms at his side the whole time instead of moving them when he walked. The clothes were basically just like thin rags that were too old and used too much, just really worn out, and they were falling apart. And then he goes on to say that maybe they were really more like layers of skin that he was somehow wearing and that were all torn up and about to fall apart. That's disgusting. So kind of watching this thing come at him. Says, all right, I'm getting out of here because it's getting too close. Puts the car in reverse, backs up, and then he tries to get around it because it's kind of blocking his way. And as he's passing it, this thing reaches for his car. Now keep in mind, he's got the windows down. But he swerves way to one side of the road. And this thing kind of reaches for his car like he's going to try to reach in and grab him. He drives off and he looks in the mirror and it just is kind of sitting there, just watching him. But that's really creepy. Just the visualization of that is pretty creepy. That's more like a skinwalker. The next one that caught my attention reminds me a little bit of the story I did not too long ago about, it may have been in one of the bonus episodes, about a Bigfoot sighting here in Pennsylvania down by Delaware Water Gap. But this one took place in Wisconsin. Again, it was a trucker, and it's a very short story. It was a truck driver driving down the road at night in Wisconsin, and as he's passing through this wooded area, he sees two pairs of shining blue eyes, he says, that caught his attention. They were clearly dogs, but they were massive. Each looked to be as big and wide as a bear. He watched them for a couple minutes, and then they walked off together and disappeared into the trees in the woods. And that was the entire encounter. And now that story from Pennsylvania, the Bigfoot, was the same thing. The guy was driving down the road and he got a CB communication from a driver who went the other way, saying that there was just something walking along the road down by the bridge. And then as he got there, he saw what looked like a family of Bigfoot walking down the road, and then they crossed and disappeared into a field. And what really caught my attention is how similar that is to the story here in Pennsylvania. Another one. So this is just this isn't even maybe Skinwalker. Who knows? This happens in New Mexico. This person was driving down a stretch of highway. They were in a convertible, and suddenly this big shadow comes over their car. And they kind of look up, and it's this humongous bird, like an enormous bird. They say its wings reached from one end of the road to the other. It had its talons out and immediately flew straight back up in the sky. As they looked up at it, they kind of swerved a little bit, like the car kind of moved, and they think that maybe that was enough to, like maybe it was going to come down and try to grab them. But because they kind of swerved, it missed, and then it flew off. Like, what kind of bird could that be? I spent time in Arizona. Never saw a giant bird like that, though. Another kind of bird-related story. This one's kind of creepy. Does this say where it was? It does not. So this person was visiting relatives who lived out in the country. That's all it says of a location. My cousins told me about a particular noise coming from the woods around their house. It was all raspy and hoarse, like someone who's been smoking their whole life, pretending to be a barred owl. Barred owls are the ones that make the call that kind of go like, who cooks for you, who cooks for you all. But imagine like Marge Simpson's sisters saying that. Who cooks for you, who cooks for you? Imagine hearing that outside your house. So that night, they woke him up, and one of the cousins is standing by the window, and they're like, listen, we can hear it. And this kid's standing there listening, and he can kind of hear it. But he's like, it's an owl. Pays no mind to it. Goes back to sleep. The next evening, though, they were doing chores. He's out there closing up the chicken coop, putting the chickens away. And then he hears the noise. He hears this weird, who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all? And looks up and just expects to see his cousins stand there messing with him. And instead, he looks up and he sees what he says are two very large, glowing, bright white eyes, at least 8 feet above the ground. Ran into the front door as fast as he could, fully expecting this is his cousins messing with him. As he approaches the house, though, his cousins come out because he's been out there for too long, and they start looking for him. They all kind of turn around, look, they see this thing standing there, and then it just kind of goes off. They all kind of admit, yeah, that's kind of what we've seen, but they had no idea what it was. There was no, like when he looked up and saw it, it wasn't like it was an owl sitting on a branch 8 feet up. There was like no branches, there's no tree around it. It was just kind of standing there. That's crazy. And of course, I'm reading these stories while I'm camping out in the woods by myself, and there's owls off in the distance. Great time to read that. So this one comes from rural North Georgia. They lived in what was a heavily wooded area, a dense area of trees starting right at the backyard. And some distance beyond the trees, there was an old abandoned school with a large playground. And as a child, I used to go out there and go play in the playground. There was like swings that they really liked. So they go out there, and one time the sister wanted to go. So they go out. It's late in the afternoon. They wind up going out there, and they're there until it starts getting dark. And they kept hearing some weird noises in the woods. Now, this one's creepy because it's kids. So they're kind of looking around, and they're kids. So they hear noise and they start looking. It's getting a little bit dark. So they're like, okay, it's time to go home. They go to take the trail through the woods back to the house. But this is where they're hearing those noises from. And they catch a glimpse of a tall, rather broad silhouette watching them from a little way off in the woods, they say. Whatever it was much wider than any of the trees there. And even from a distance, they could tell that it was much taller and was much wider than anyone they had ever seen. So they decide, nope, we're not taking the trail to the woods. We're going to go out the old entrance to the school and take the roads because, it takes longer, but you can take the roads back to, you can obviously take the roads back to the house. They're going to do the road walk. So they go out and they're walking down the road, and they can tell that whatever was watching them is now following them. And it's staying in the woods. It won't come out to the road. It's staying in the woods, but it's following them. As every time they make a turn, it makes the turn. It's just following home. And then they start hearing whistles, which is creepy. They don't state what kind of whistles, but they start hearing whistles. They keep going down the road to walk a little faster. And then a car comes driving up, and it's their parents, who are pretty pissed off that they're still out, and they were coming looking for them. And they tell their parents what they saw, and that's it. They're like, you're not going in the woods anymore. You're not going to go to that playground anymore. You're going to stay away from it. You're not going out when it's too dark. Because they don't know. It could have just been a person that was just watching them, which is even scarier, I think, than a dogman or some kind of cryptid in the woods. But that was, I saw that, and that story just creeped me out because you don't know what that could actually be. And if they were actually seeing that, and there's no reason to doubt that they didn't see something, it could have just been some creeper in the woods. Like I said in the beginning, a lot of the story of Dogman, a lot of like online sources want to say this all started in Michigan, but these stories are from all over the place. I was reading stories in Canada. Here's one from East Texas. This woman and her husband moved to this property that was just perfect for them. Surrounded by woods, wildlife, all kinds. They loved it. There would be, after a while though, they started to get these weird experiences starting to happen. And there would be like tapping noises on the side of the house. Every once in a while there'd be a bang. Sometimes there was whistles. Here we go with whistles again. And this mostly seemed to happen, or more activity would happen when her husband was out of town. So when he wasn't around, it got worse. They had dogs. And she would notice that when the dogs got really quiet, like they were very active and, very protective, and they weren't afraid of anything. But when they got quiet, like they knew something was up, this tapping would start. And it was happening on not just the windows, but on the walls. Like something was going around the house. She just says something was sneaking around out there. Several times when it would tap on the door, and then run off the porch and go hide behind one of the trees. And she caught enough glimpses of it as it was doing this, because it became pretty regular, that she said it was very tall, very wide, massive figure covered in hair, could see eyes shine, and it was trying to get her to go outside. So they would wait a couple minutes, and as she went to open the door, it would run back up and it would tap on the door, and it would run off and go hide behind the tree. and wait for her. Then once the activity would die down, the dogs would go back to normal. Like, so she didn't see it. Like, if it stopped tapping on the door and it would go away, the dogs would kind of, okay, it's gone. And that's how she knew it wasn't around. Her husband believed her, and had already found signs of its presence, including large footprints outside their house and the imprint of a huge hand on the window that was larger than any of their hands. Her husband said that there was no activity when she wasn't there. So if she was there and he was there, they might hear something now and then. He'd go away and it'd ramp up. But if she left, he wouldn't experience anything. Like, you hear a lot of people talk about like Bigfoot and things like this, and they want to have these encounters. But a lot of times these things it's pretty dark. Like, this thing's trying to lure this woman out of her house. Why? That's just weird. So this next story, 1990 in Texas, the person relaying the story was 12 years old, walking down a road in the country, heard something behind them, turned around, and saw a deer running straight for him. It was being chased by a massive black dog, and the pair of them were coming right for me, he says. Just a few yards away from him, the deer suddenly turns to his left and jumps over the brush and the embankment and takes off into the trees. And now he's just staring down this large dog. And it's, again, running right for him. It looked like it was looking in my eyes the whole time. As it got closer, I thought I was done for, and I thought about my ma and my pa. Tried turning around to run, got his foot stuck on something and fell over backwards. And the dog was just bearing down, full speed. And then at the last second, it turned to the left and took off in the woods after the deer. Imagine that. Imagine trying to run and falling and seeing this massive dog. Now, it goes on to say that it was too big and wide to be any ordinary dog. Also, when he was standing, this thing was taller, not only taller than him, but taller than the deer. Here's a couple of stories. Not Dogman related. Not Skinwalker related, I don't think. These are two creepy stories that are kind of related. So this next story, upstate New York, no year is given. And late at night, driving down the road, see some kids walking on the side of the road. Now I'm going to read this right from the story that's put in here. It's so I thought I'd pull over to see if something was wrong and if they needed help. As soon as I had that thought, they stopped walking, turned to face me, and waited for me to start pulling over for them. Then before I came to a complete stop, they rushed to me and were already at the window. So very weird, almost like they knew that this person was going to pull over. So they go on to say that I felt like something was very wrong. I didn't want to be there anymore. I felt so off that I also didn't want to even look at them. But at the same time, I felt like I had to. I was starting to feel very strongly that I had to open the window. They were trying to talk to me. They were trying to talk me into letting them into the car. A couple of weird things. These kids were wearing dark glasses, even though it was nighttime. They were getting more and more insistent. And the whole time they were talking, it felt like this person just wanted to unlock the door. Like felt like they were being controlled. Then one of them takes their glasses off. And when he did that, this person notices that their eyes were completely black. Then the other one takes off their glasses, also has black eyes. And they just start staring this person down through the window. Complete silence. They've got the window down just a little bit so they can talk, but they're just staring. Then one of them starts talking, and the story says, his tone became threatening, and he said I'd be making a mistake and would be sorry if I didn't help them. This person just takes off. They're like, they kind of snap out of it. They take off. They watch in the rearview mirror, and they just stand there. They just watch them drive away, and then they just disappeared. Like, they're looking in the mirror. They look ahead to make sure they're staying on the road. They look back in the mirror, and they're just gone. They didn't run off. They weren't even like attempting to move as they're watching, and they only looked away for a second, and they were just gone. So the next story happens not too far away in Connecticut. They had just moved to a new home, And not too close to the city, not too far away from it either. Really nice area. The only thing they didn't like was that there was a cemetery nearby that they had to drive by every time they wanted to leave. So after they move in, they notice that there's a boy that's spending a lot of time by himself in that cemetery. Always wore the same clothing and always had his hood up. Every time they drive by, would notice this kid. Then started to look like, so every time at night, during the day, they never saw him. At night, though, they always saw this kid hanging out in the cemetery. Then it looked like it started to, the kids started to notice when they were driving by. So they drive by and they look to see the kid stand in the cemetery, and the kid would turn and look. And then this person's thinking, well, okay, just here's the car driving by and is looking. But then starts to notice that even if there's other cars on the road, this boy just turns around and stares at them. Not any of the other cars, just looks right at them as they're driving by. Really starts to creep this person out. So one night, late at night, doorbell rings. Gets a really weird feeling because it's kind of late for someone to be at the door. They go to the door, open it up, and of course, there's that boy standing there. They get a better look at him because now it's right in front of them. Could have been 14 or 15 years old. He was surprisingly thin, looked haggard, with very pale complexion, and large black eyes. There was absolutely no white in all of those oversized eyes of his, it says. As soon as I looked in those eyes, I was afraid. What happens next? This black-eyed kid starts asking to let him come inside of the house. Starts using different reasons. Right from the book, it says, he said he needed to use the phone inside my home to call his mom. When I offered to bring my cell phone to him to let him use it at the door, he instead said that he was hungry and wanted to come inside for some food. When I offered to bring something to the door for him to take and eat, he then said he needed to come inside because he was tired. That circled back to me offering to let him use my cell phone so he could call his mom and go home. He wouldn't accept any of the options I gave him and kept asking to come inside. Then his tone changed and he started to sound more forceful, telling me that I would regret not letting him in and helping him. Very much like the last story with the kids saying that they'd be sorry for not helping. So, very religious person, wearing a crucifix, is feeling like they're in a trance. Like this kid is starting to get inside their head. You're going to let me in. And they start to actually reach for the lock because they've got the door open, but there's like a screen door, a storm door in front, and that's locked. And starts reaching to unlock the door. And as they reach forward to unlock the door, their crucifix is on kind of a loose chain. It kind of falls out and hits their hand, and it snaps them out of it. And there's like, what am I doing? So grabs the crucifix and starts praying, just reciting prayers, prayer after prayer after prayer. And immediately, the boy gets real quiet, and he starts smiling maliciously. It was very wicked, wide open mouth grin, it says. His face became contorted and hideous. It looked like he was a real life demon. After a while, the kid just turns around and walks down the street. Now, it's nighttime. There's some street lights, but there's like shadows from trees and whatever. And they're watching this kid walk away. And as he walks away, gets to like a shadowy part under a tree and just vanishes. Very similar to the previous story where the kids, they look back 1 second, they're there, they look at the road, they look back, and the kids are gone. Black-eyed kid stories are really, really weird. The next story, another one from Texas. This guy was new to the area, looking to make friends, met up with some people who liked to fish, and invited him one day to go fishing at this prime location. Absolutely. Goes, has a good time, catches all the fish he wants, and getting towards the end of the day, they're loading everything up. Now, he was the only one who had driven there by himself. Everybody else had piled into a couple of their cars, and they all throw their gear in their cars, and they take off. Now, he's still getting his gear together, putting everything away, but first time he'd been there, it's getting near sunset. It's this beautiful area. He's just kind of hanging out and enjoying it, taking it all in. And he starts hearing noises in the woods next to where they're fishing, or where he was fishing. But he's like, whatever, it's the woods. There's, it's not like he'd never been outside before. So he's kind of curious. What am I going to see? Is a deer going to come out? Is it going to be a bear or a possum? What's it going to be? So he's kind of watching, and nothing comes out. And he's like, I probably should get going. And he turns and start walking back to his truck, and hears another noise, and kind of turns back and sees a rock come fly out of the woods and hit the side of his truck. And he's like, what? Who just threw a rock at my truck? What was that? So he gets kind of mad. And now he's like, I want to go see what's going on. So he goes back to the edge of the woods, and he's looking to see who's in there, because he wants to fight this person. He just hit my truck with a rock. Another rock comes flying out, and that hits his truck. Now he's really pissed. Now he's swearing into the woods, and he's yelling, and he's ready to fight somebody. And then he hears more noise. He's looking, he's trying to see, and he's about ready to start yelling again. And he realizes that he's the only thing making sound right now. Everything around him gets dead quiet. There's no birds, there's no insects, nothing, just him yelling. And then he sees something stand up. Now he says he's over 6 feet tall. And what he saw was at least 3 feet taller than him, and was so wide. He says you could probably fit 1 or 2 people shoulder to shoulder. Pretty big creature. He says it was maybe 800 pounds or more of just muscle and hair. And it started swaying or shifting left and right, and he could hear it breathing. And he's just kind of now like, what am I going to do? I thought this was a person. Like, if somebody was in the woods messing around, I'm pretty sure I could take a person, but I don't know what this is. So he gets the feeling that this thing is agitated, that he's gotten so close. And he's not showing, he is now, but initially he wasn't showing any fear. This thing threw a rock at him. He starts yelling at it. Throws another rock. He starts yelling again. So now this thing is like, well, you want to fight? He kind of comes to his senses, and he turns around. He's like, starts backing away slowly, and he gets far enough away that it kind of looks like it relaxes a little bit. It stops swaying. So he runs the truck, gets in the driver's seat, and he looks looks to make sure this thing isn't following him. And it comes out of the woods, but it doesn't come to him. It goes to the back of his truck, and it grabs the truck. And he's like completely astonished by this, that it's going for the truck and not him. And he's like, what's this thing doing? And then it starts shaking his truck. So he's like, I'm out. Hits the gas, takes off, looks in the mirror, and he sees that it's just standing there. It's not chasing him, but now it's holding something. And he's just like, I want to get out of here. He slows down a little bit because he's trying to see. So he's kind of watching this thing, starts heading towards the woods, and then he sees another one come out and kind of walk up to it. Looks like it kind of wants to get what he's holding, but the first one is much bigger, and it apparently isn't going to relinquish whatever it has. So he's like, all right, there's 2 of them now. Even if the other one is smaller, I'm not messing around with this. He decides, I'm going home. So he drives back home, gets to his house, checks out the truck, and he says, it's actually not that badly damaged. Just 2 dents where the rocks hit it, but where this thing was in the back, it's a little scuffed up, but nothing's really damaged. Except there's something missing. He had a big cooler they had all his fish in. This thing stole his fish. It stole the fish out of the back of his truck. So he thinks it wasn't after him anyway. And he starts to think about, wildlife and how people react. And he's thinking, he goes, I have nothing to back this up, but it almost seems like, if you're trying to scare, if you've got like a skunk or something at your house, you're going to like throw something near it, like throw a rock near it at the garbage and scare it off. He goes, is that what this thing was trying to do to me? Was it trying to scare me off by throwing rocks so it could get to my fish? Now, he decided he never went back to the fish, and he didn't want to tell his new friends what he saw. He would ask them, like when they said they were going there fishing, and he'd always come up with an excuse. But he would ask them if they had seen anything had seen any interesting animals, had anything like that happen, but without saying what he saw, because he didn't want people to think he was crazy. He just moved to the area. He's like, I don't want to tell people that I saw, whatever this thing was, this giant beast come out and steal the fish out of my truck. And now we're going to get to the story you're probably waiting for from the title of this episode. We're going to move on to Bangladesh. And this just says this happened a long time ago near the central part of Bangladesh. Late at night, and this guy was walking home from a celebration, like his relatives were having some kind of celebration, and he was walking home. And as he's on his way home, he notices two bright red lights from a distance, but they were getting bigger. And he knows they're not just getting bigger, they're getting closer to me. And they got close, maybe 10 steps away, and he realizes these are eyes. So there's these two red eyes standing there. And I'm just going to read the description that was given. They were the eyes of the most hideous, horrible, misshapen donkey. It was giving the same smell as a meat that was rotten. Its legs and body were looking as if they were twisted. One of its ears was looking as if it was covered in blood, as if somebody cut it in half, maybe by accident. Its face was twisted in so much angriness. Its body also looking covered completely in wounds. Its mouth was open and it was snapping so much. He says, I knew it was a spirit, not a flesh and blood animal, and I knew it was evil. It started to stomp one of its legs. It then lowered its leg, lowered its head, and ran at me. Now, there's the streets are surrounded by private property. It's all homes and private properties. So with nowhere else to go, this guy just runs off the road into private property. And the donkey will run right up to the edge of the property, but won't come onto the property. So one of the beliefs, and one of the well-known beliefs, so it's something that everyone, he says, in Bangladesh knows, is that an evil spirit can't enter your property without some sort of permission. So either you have to tell it can come into your property, or it has to be attached to you, and then you are given permission to enter the property, and then it can follow you. So he uses this knowledge as a means to basically trespass his way back home. He's like, I'm not going back on that road because that donkey's going to kill me. So he just keeps going from property to property to get back to his house. And he's got a long way to go. And his biggest concern is that it's not just like one long road, there's crossroads. So the donkey knows that at some point he's got to cross the road. So it runs ahead and it stands there and waits for him. And then he's got to turn around and go back and get the donkey to chase him. Then he'll run the other way and jump over the fence and cross the road real quick and jump into the next private property. And the donkey will come up and chase him. And this happens for hours and hours and hours. And at a certain point, he's close to being home. He's on somebody else's property. He's avoiding these roads. He's exhausted. He's just trying to catch his breath. He's got his head down, is just kind of sitting there, just taking a breather. And he notices that it's light now. The sun's coming up. And he's like, oh, where's the donkey? And he looks around and it's gone. As soon as the sun came up, it disappeared. And then he went home and everything was okay. Not the most terrifying story, but I did not expect to read the story of a demon donkey in Bangladesh. Thought that was pretty cool. I hope you guys enjoyed these stories. Absolutely check these books out. Again, these are two collections of stories. Dogman, Bigfoot, and Something More, a brief collection of encounters by P.D. King, and Dogman, Frightening Encounters by Tim Lyons, volumes 1, 2, and 3. Absolutely suggest you guys check those out if you're interested in crazy, weird stories like that. I don't suggest you read them while you're camping solo, listening to owls and stuff like that. Probably not the best thing, especially since some of these stories cover things like owls that are 8 feet tall. really weird. The Skinwalker stories and the black-eyed kids, those ones are the creepiest because they're so similar. Just the way that they're told, they're trying to they need permission to come in, and then if you don't help them, you're going to regret it. Both of those stories, though, the person says nothing happened afterwards. Like, it's not like anything bad happened and I regret it not helping them, but it's just like it's like a manipulation to try to get you to help. Why? I've got a lot of editing to do, so I'm going to get to that. So that's going to do it for me. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you have any stories that you'd like to share, if you've got some Dogman or black-eyed kids or any kind of weird stories like this, you can contact me at podcast@primitiveintelligence.com. If you wouldn't mind me sharing it, let me know. If you want it to be anonymous, just let me know. Or if you just want to share it with me and you don't want me to say anything, just let me know. I'd love to hear the story. I got a lot of editing to do. Perfect timing with the dog, if you heard that. Great for a Dogman related episode. So I've got a lot of editing to do. I'm going to get on that so I can get this up for you. I apologize. This one it's getting close to 11:30, so I'm probably not going to have this done in time, but it will be up today. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Enjoy the rest of your week. See ya.